Hello everyone. So today we'll be talking about chapter 5, which is basically putting together a research proposal. If we talk about it roughly, we're going to be discussing in this lesson what all the components of a research proposal are. But if we're just to talk about it, very in a very broad fashion, what exactly is a research proposal? Your research proposal is roughly, it is a plan that you have for your research, right? It basically covers all sorts of topics in terms of what exactly are you studying about about this particular topic. How are you going to be doing it? Once you do have data, how are you going to analyze it, right? All of this is contained within your research proposal, right? This brings us to our next question, which is basically, why do we need a research proposal? Why can we just not, start doing a research when it's all up in our head? Why can't we just start off if we have a particular topic of interest, right? Why do we need a research proposal to begin with, right? Now, the answer to this is twofold, and this brings us to what the aims of a research proposal are, right? Now, one of the first aims of a research proposal, right, is to convince individuals. Now, you might know that when students are in their senior year, they have an option of doing a thesis, right? The first part of that thesis is just putting together a research proposal. Why are you putting together a research proposal? Because you're trying to convince individuals. In this specific example, you're trying to convince the committee, the departmental committee, that your project, right, whatever project that you've picked out, it is worth doing, right? It is worth spending whatever resources are being spent on it. Now, those resources can come in the form of time, they can come in the form of money, they can come in the form of effort, hard work, all the resources that you might be using, all the tests that you might be using, right? So you need to convince others that this idea that you have, that you present in your research proposal, is actually worth putting this much effort in. It's an idea that will benefit someone. Now, that someone might just be the academic community, but that there is someone who is going to benefit from doing this research, right? So that's one bit of it, that you need to convince individuals, mostly IRB committees of institutes, that your project is worth doing, right? That it is going to be worth all of the effort and the time that's put into it, right? What is the second part of why you need to put together a research proposal? So you might feel that you're extremely clear about all of the aims, all of the methods that you're going to be using, right? But what you see is that unless you put it down on paper, you do not accomplish the degree of clarity that you need going into a research, right? So what a research proposal does is that it lets you put everything on paper and be extremely clear about it, right? It lets you put forth reasons for doing what you're going to be doing. So in a research proposal, what you're doing is you're firstly proposing whatever you're going to be doing. So you're, for example, picking up a set of research questions, right? You are saying these are the people I'm going to be talking to, right? So whatever your participants are going to be, right? And as you're doing that, you're always, right, addressing the question why, right? Whatever you're proposing, you're trying to answer why, in the sense that if you are talking to a certain amount of people, let's say there are 3 individuals that you'll be talking to, why will you be talking to 3 individuals? Why not 6 individuals? Why not 2 individuals, right? If you're talking to, let's say, university students, why is it that you're talking to university students? Why did you why did you decide to go with this particular kind of sample or this particular kind of participant, right? Why could you not talk to people who are not college students? If you are looking into, let's say your topic broadly is experiences of individuals who are working with others who have been diagnosed with some kind of terminal illness. Wait, let me write that down. So if, for example, you are looking at experiences, right, of caregivers of individuals with a terminal illness. Now, this is a very broad topic, right? And in qualitative research, one of the things that you'll see is that you need to sort of have a smaller pool of participants, right, that you're talking to, because you're usually looking at very specific phenomena when you're doing qualitative research, right? So you'll perhaps want to narrow this down. You'll perhaps want to focus on what sort of experiences you're talking about, right? When you're talking about individuals with terminal illnesses, what sort of terminal illnesses are you talking about? Are you talking about cancer? Are you talking about something like Alzheimer's? Are you talking about some other form of disease, right? So you need to be very, very clear about what you're going to be doing, right? And when you're doing that, right, so for example, you choose one particular terminal illness. Let's say you choose cancer. Now, when you choose cancer, you need to constantly be addressing why in your research proposal. Why did you choose cancer, right? Or, for example, if you're looking at experiences of caregivers, now these can be different kinds of caregivers. So caregivers can also be nurses. Caregivers can also be people who are paid to care for such individuals, or they can be family members, right? So if you're looking at, let's say, family members who are caregivers, right, you need to talk about why are you specifically focusing on family, right? So again, you need to be addressing why. If you decide, given this topic, that you're going to be talking to, let's say, 6 caregivers, right? You need to address why are you working with 6? Why aren't you working with 3? Why aren't you working with 10, right? So you need to have sort of this coherent framework or a logical explanation for whatever it is that you do. Now, sometimes your answer can very simply be because I could only find 6 individuals, right, to the answer to this, right, or to this why. Or that your answer here can be that I was interested in looking at family members and their health, right? And when you're asked about cancer, you can talk about how, this was one of the goals of your study, that you wanted to specifically focus on cancer patients. That could be because, perhaps you had watched someone care for someone with cancer, and you had noticed changes in their personality or their behavior or how they thought about themselves. So that is why this topic was close to your heart. Whatever the case may be, you always need to address the question why in your research proposal, right? You always need to have a logical explanation for whatever it is that you are doing, right? That can also be, so whenever we'll talk about this going further, that even with, when you're putting together a research proposal, one of the components of that is the conceptual framework. Now, even with the conceptual framework, you need to, perhaps have a particular theoretical framework with which to view the phenomena, right? Now, you also need to answer why you are using this particular theoretical framework versus another. Similarly with epistemology, if you're using a direct realist epistemology, you have to have a reason for using a direct realist epistemology rather than a critical realist or a phenomenological epistemology, right? So, this is everything that you need to address in your research proposal, and what this does is that it provides clarity to whatever it is that you're doing, right? Now, let's move on in terms of what are all the components of a research proposal. So one of the first things that are integral to your research proposal are your research questions, right? Without your research questions, you cannot move forward. Now, why is it important to have to form research questions, why can you not just, take it forward if you only have a particular topic? The reason why it's so important to have research questions is because research questions orient you towards specific aspects, right, of a topic. Right, so if we, take our previous example, so you're talking about experiences of caregivers, right? Now that's your topic more broadly, right? But when you're asking a research question, you're being a lot more specific. So for example, you could be saying in a research question, right, if we go ahead with the same example, that how do caregivers of individuals with a terminal illness manage stress, right? Let me write this down. So it's basically, how do individuals or how do caregivers, more specifically, of individuals with terminal illness manage stress, right? This is a realist kind of question because it tells you something about a social phenomena. But can you see how this research question, it orients you towards a specific kind of experience that caregivers have, right? When you're talking about experiences of caregivers, it's a lot more general, right? Those experiences can be, as wide as something for their own being, right? How do they experience themselves, right? What does that tell them about their own vulnerabilities? How do they view life, being a caregiver of an individual with a terminal illness, right? But when you talk about this research question, that how do caregivers of individuals with terminal illness manage stress, right? That's one specific aspect of all of the experiences that caregivers of individuals with terminal illnesses could have. Does that make sense? So basically what I'm trying to say here is that experiences of caregivers of individuals with a terminal illness could be so many, right? Those experiences could be with them, managing stress. It could be with them managing time. It could be with them managing emotions. It could be with them, sort of experiencing emotions, experiencing certain emotions, right? Experiencing themselves, right? All of those different things could come, in the purview of what experiences of caregivers of individuals with a terminal illness look like. But when you have this specific research question, this was a topic, and this is a research question, then this research question orients you towards something very specific about this topic. And that's what we mean when we say that research questions orient you towards specific aspects of a topic, right? So when you have a research question, you know exactly what you're looking for when you're about to, talk to someone, or you're about to do an interview or conduct a focus group, or whatever your data collection method is, right? So that is why your research questions are extremely important, right? Just as a way of revision, I'll just repeat here that in qualitative research, we do not have hypotheses, right? We do not have, predefined variables, right? What we start off with are research questions, right? So let's move on to the next bit. So first is research questions, right? Then you have something else, which is called the conceptual framework. Now, what exactly is the conceptual framework, right? A lot of students confuse this with being a literature review, right? So this is basically, I would say it's more than a literature review, because when you're doing research, right, in a qualitative sense, or when you're doing qualitative research, right, what you're doing is the basic purpose of doing a literature review, even in quantitative research, right, is to understand what other people are saying about this topic. What are the most recent views about this topic, right? What are the most recent findings on whatever topic I am looking at, right? Now, one of the problems is that when you're doing qualitative research, sometimes you're looking at areas that nobody has looked at previously. There might not be a lot of research on that particular topic, right? That is why a literature review perhaps is not enough. There are other reasons because of which a literature review is not enough as well. A conceptual framework, part of a conceptual framework is literature review, is being aware of the work that's been done on this area. So, for example, one of the areas that I was very interested in was postpartum experiences of women, right? One of the things that I saw when I did a literature review was that sometimes what happens is that if a pregnancy was unplanned, then that seems to be a predictor in terms of women developing postpartum depression. From that emerged a research question, which was that, what is it about unplanned pregnancies that might predispose women to developing postpartum depression, right? So sometimes what, a literature review can actually do is that it can provide you with research questions, because with qualitative research, one of the things that you can do is that after doing a literature review of the quantitative research on the field, you can actually try fill in the gaps, because there are a lot of questions that quantitative research cannot answer. It can tell you that two variables are related, but how exactly are they related? That is something that quantitative research sometimes cannot answer, right? That is where qualitative research can come in, right? But let's come back to talking about what a conceptual framework is. So basically, with a conceptual framework, we say that it's more than a literature review, in the sense that what I'm supposing is that when you're forming research questions, you're already reading something about your phenomena of interest, about your topic of interest, right? So yes, literature review is there, and it's an important bit of it, but that's not all that your conceptual framework is, right? Your conceptual framework is also, the epistemology that you are subscribing to, right? How are you viewing this phenomena? Are you viewing it in a realist lens? Are you viewing it using a critical realist lens? Are you viewing it using a phenomenological lens or a social constructionist lens, right? So all of this will also be part of your conceptual framework, right? Sometimes what you will need to do is that you will need to sort of form new theories, right? Or what you'll need to do is that you will need to look at, before we come to forming new theories, you will have to look at certain theoretical frameworks, right, to explain certain phenomena. And this is kind of linked to our discussion on epistemologies, right? What do we mean when we say a theoretical framework? What exactly do we mean by this? So basically, when we talk about a theoretical framework, let me just correct spelling here. Right? One of the things that we mean by this is that, and this is very important, that, when we're building up a conceptual framework, right, we are conceptualizing different aspects of the research. What does that mean, right? What does conceptualizing mean? Now, let's just go back to our research question here, right? Which is, how do caregivers of individuals with terminal illness manage stress, right? Now, the thing is that here, in this sort of research question, when you're talking about a conceptual framework, what you need to do is that you need to conceptualize all of the different parts of this research question, right? What does that mean? First of all, what that means is, how do you conceptualize terminal illness, right? This might be very simple, right? You can just define terminal illness. You can say that it's any kind of illness which, has a long-term prognosis, that that, it's going to last perhaps for, life, as long as this person is alive, or for, a considerable amount of time, right? So that's one of the things that you need to conceptualize. Then you also need to conceptualize stress in this research question, because we're talking about this specific research question here. But whatever your research question may be, you need to conceptualize different parts of it. Now, what does that mean, right? How can you conceptualize stress, right? Here, what you need to understand is that, and all of this goes sort of hand in hand, that you need to keep in mind whatever epistemology that you were using, right? And you need to sort of come up with not just a definition of what stress is, but the concept of stress itself, right? So here, for example, you can say that the way that we're conceptualizing stress, right, for the sake of this study, right, is that it is a phenomena, right, which is perceived differently by different individuals. So, it is something that is individual to each being, right? Does that make sense? So it has, this subjective component to it, right? That is something that you could say, right? You could say that, stress is something that is able to be managed. Now, that's one of the assumptions that is inherent in your research question, right? That there are techniques for managing stress, and those techniques or individuals are active in how they manage their stress, right? This is one of the assumptions behind your research questions, and therefore this brings us to the conceptualization of caregivers of individuals as well. That the assumption here is that these individuals are active in the sense that they're not just passively experiencing something, right? Rather, that they actively manage whatever it is that they're experiencing, right? So you have also conceptualized how these caregivers are behaving, right? But, when you come to stress again, right, you need to add different components to it. So again, the way you're conceptualizing stress is that it is something that can be managed through different techniques, right? Again, if, for example, you're looking at terminal illness, or you're looking at any illness for that matter, right? A lot of times, students talk about how certain phenomena in qualitative research is a biopsychosocial phenomena, right? Which basically means that it does not only have implications for our biology or our psychology, it also has social ramifications, right? And similarly, you can talk about this here as well. When you're conceptualizing terminal illness, you can talk about how terminal illness is a biopsychosocial phenomena, right? What does that mean? Right? What that means is that, a terminal illness has biological consequences, right? But these are not just, they do not just exist in a vacuum. They can be mediated by the social, aspects in which an individual exists. They can be mediated by psychological factors, right? Some people might, conceptualize terminal illness in a different way. They might understand it in a different way. They might make sense of it in a very different way, and that may alter their experience of it. What does that mean? So, for example, if an individual is diagnosed with cancer, right, and they take it to mean that, somehow, that this is a sign of God's wrath towards them, right? Now, and this is a punishment for whatever sins that they had committed. Now, this thinking, their conceptualization of the illness in this manner will have consequences in how, they recover, perhaps in how they feel about the illness itself, right? In what sort of experiences do they report, right? How do they feel about the illness? How do they feel about being diagnosed with it, right? Versus another individual who sees this illness as being, just a random event that's occurring in the universe. For them, the consequences on their psychology, on their emotional state will be very different, right? So a lot of times when we're looking at phenomena which also has a biological basis, we talk about it or we conceptualize it as being a biopsychosocial phenomena, What we mean by that is that it has consequences on all three of these different domains, right? And all three of these different domains, the bio, right, the bio domain, the psychological domain, and the social domain, right? All of these different domains interact with one another and influence one another. How society views a terminal illness will have consequences on how you view it yourself, right? And that might have consequences on how you experience it biologically. Does that make sense, right? And especially, even with stress, we can say the same thing, that, it has psychosocial ramifications, that it's not just, our way of dealing with stress, but it's also how other people deal with stress. That is something that we also sort of are influenced by, right? The point of this is that, is to show you how you are to conceptualize each and every part of a research question. This is what you're actually doing in your conceptual framework, right? Your epistemology is obviously going hand in hand with this, because if you're, for example, using, let's say a direct realist epistemology, you are looking at, stress being a real phenomena, right? As not just being something that is inside people's heads, but as being a real phenomena, which may be experienced differently by different people, but that doesn't mean that it ceases to exist as a phenomena in itself, right? So phenomenology is also, epistemology is also something that is tied in to the conceptual framework, right? Let's do one more example of this. So let's have one more question, and then we can try looking at it in this sort of manner. Right. So let's come up with a question. So, right, let's just say, what are the experiences of students during their first week of college or university? Now, how will you conceptualize different aspects of this research, right? Now, first of all, you need to be clear about your epistemology. What sort of epistemology are you using? Are you using a phenomenological epistemology? Are you using a realist epistemology? That will have consequences for how you'll conceptualize this, right? Now, let's say we use a phenomenological epistemology, right? Now we say, what are the experiences of students during their first week of college, right? Now, how do you conceptualize first week of college, right? You could say that, that's the time when they've enrolled and they've just joined and, they're still attending orientation, right? And all of that, right? What else do you say about the first week of college? Why are you doing this research? So first week of college, you can conceptualize this as being an extremely important time, right? Which is consequential for the sort of friends that these individuals will be making, right? For the sort of peer groups that they will be part of, right? The sort of, classes that they're enrolled in, right? What their feedback about those classes are, that perhaps will have consequences for, their college experience as a whole, right? What about experiences of students during their first... So experiences of students, how will you conceptualize this? Now, this, again, differs really widely if you are doing, let's say, a realist sort of approach, if you have a realist approach versus if you have a phenomenological approach. How so? So experiences of students given a realist setting, right? Again, the assumption will be that there are such things as experiences of students outside of the students themselves, right? Whereas a more phenomenological approach would say that, we have to look at experiences